Good afternoon, everybody. It is by our synchronized clocks, 1 o'clock, and because we've got such a tight program for you, we're going to start on time and welcome you to what works and what doesn't to reduce poverty and expand opportunity. My name is Deborah Weinstein, and I'm with the Coalition on Human Needs. We've brought together some of our expert members to provide congressional staff and advocates here and around the country with crucially important facts and analysis. There is unprecedented long-term evidence about what really does work to reduce poverty, and you'll hear about some of that today. I want to say how very grateful we are to our hardworking co-sponsors, who you'll see listed in your handouts and at home or at work, wherever you are. I do want to interrupt to say, here we are in the Gabe Zimmerman room at the Capitol Visitor Center, and our hearts are full because Gabe Zimmerman was killed in an act of wanton violence, and we have seen far too many repeat acts of wanton violence, including to the LGBT community in Orlando. So, as I say, our hearts are full, and it is time to act. But over the next 2 hours, we'll start by being grounded in the real-life experience of one low-income worker, Lana Clark, who will be interviewed by Olivia Golden, Executive Director of the Center for Law and Social Policy. Then we'll move to an analysis of what is and isn't in the Ryan Task Force Poverty Plan by Melissa Boteach, Vice President of the Poverty to Prosperity Program at the Center for American Progress. And then to Liz Schott, Senior Fellow at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, for an explanation of why temporary assistance for needy families is not a good anti-poverty model. And then we will follow with a panel to discuss 3 key areas that must be part of an effective anti-poverty strategy: the safety net and anti-hunger policies, work, and housing. And we'll conclude with remarks from a very special guest, House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi. We may have another extra special guest, Representative Barbara Lee. We hope she can make it. We will take questions from people here and from those of you watching around the country. So if you think of a question, if you're here, you have a card on your chair, please write the question on a card, and we'll come by to pick them up at intervals. And online, you can send us a question via Twitter. Tweet your questions to @CoalitionOnHN and use the hashtag TalkPoverty. And everybody at home should be able to see that. Please look at all the bios in the packets. I'm not going to read them because we don't have a lot of time. But note also that part of our goal is to provide you with resources to continue our work together to reduce poverty. Those are listed in the handouts available online. So now we're going to go right to our program. Our first invaluable experts, Lana Clark, in conversation with Olivia Golden.
Good afternoon. It's great to have what I've been told is more than 100 people here and many hundreds online for this conversation. We're really thrilled that so many people were able to take part. And it's truly an honor for me to have the chance to interview Lana Clark, whose life, as you'll hear in a moment, is very busy with a mix of work and school, and who's taken the time to be here so that her experiences can be useful to all of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So when we had a chance to talk the other day, we thought we would start with what Lana's life is like now and then work backwards to what happened and to the lessons that she sees. So tell us a little bit about right now, your work, your school, what you're balancing.
Okay. Well, currently, my name is Lana Clark, and currently I'm a student at ITT Technical College. I'm obtaining an associate's degree in Network Systems Administration, and I work at Potomac Job Corps Centers part-time as a security officer. Also, I'm about to turn 50.
I'm not confessing my age, which is well beyond that. Talk a little bit about your hours at work, what it's like, what you've been trying to do to get a more sustaining employment.
Okay. Well, I've been in Potomac Job Corps for like almost 3 years. October will be 3 years. And I've tried to work as a full-time employee there. However, I have not been selected for whatever reason, and my hours were reduced. I worked 32 hours in the beginning when I first got there. Now I'm down to 24 hours a week. It is impossible for a person to survive off of $1,000 a month.
So talk a little bit about, I'm suspecting that everybody in this room is now thinking about if they were working 24 hours a week and trying to go to school and live in the district, what that would be like. It must be a very difficult balancing act.
Very difficult.
Any examples you can tell us of either what makes it work or what are some examples of when it goes off the rails?
Well, one time it went off the rails, and I had to contact the director where I live at and let them know, like recently, let them know that I was missing $100, on my paycheck. So I had to go and sign a notice to let them know that my rent would be on time with the late fees, as well as, just picture trying to get to school and money, the metro is very expensive. So just picture trying to get to school 3 days a week, where it's $15 a day off of $1,000, not to mention $50 a week to go to work.
Because of transportation
Because
as
of
well.
transportation. That's a car note if you add it up.
And have you thought about trying to get a car?
How can I?
Mm-hmm.
Impossible.
And so that adds, I'm sure, uncertainty into your
Yes, it
schedule as
does.
well. And when we talked, you were also telling me that in addition to 3 days a week of work and 3 days a week of school, you're also job hunting.
Yes, absolutely. All the time.
And doing that without a car.
And doing it without a car.
Can you talk just a little bit about what's been helpful to you over this time? What helps you? I think when we talked, you mentioned tax credit resources, but what are the kinds of help that you've been getting that enable you to keep going?
Well, I used to, I had some services from Human Services, like I had food stamps, and that, you have to be chronically homeless to have food stamps, to collect $200 worth of food stamps. And and I also had free health care. I have to reinstate the food stamps and the health care.
So those are important.
Those were important. Also, when I got my income taxes, that helped a lot with my rent and transportation.
And I think people in this room may know some of the technical aspects of that, and because you don't have children,
No,
right?
I don't have
It's a
any children.
small amount that you get back,
Yes.
but even that amount, when you're as precarious as that,
Right.
was helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about how this all happened, because you and I talked a little bit
Sure.
about that.
Well, I was employed. However, some things happened. I got terminated from my job. I was living with my significant other then. We had a house in the district in Northwest, and my name was not on the lease, but I was paying my rent, at every month and help paying the bills and whatever in the household. And when I lost my job, she decided that I had to leave.
Wow.
And it made me homeless. It was the first time I've ever been homeless.
Wow.
I didn't know anything about it, didn't know what to do, and I wound up on the street.
Wow.
And I stayed outside one night. I told her about it. Then I wound up sleeping in the vestibule of that same house where I used to pay rent at.
Wow.
3 nights until I found a shelter to go to.
And then what helped you? When we talked, I was so impressed with how you've pulled yourself, you've come through from something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about what helped that happen.
Well, what happened was I went to one of the places where I used to stay at. It's called In Street Village. And I stayed there for a year, a month, and 2 days in the shelter. I moved into permanent housing, and I stayed there for a little while. And then I decided, okay, well, I make a little money. I'm going to try to see if I can get me a place. So I tried to get the apartment. I got the apartment. It was a beautiful 1-bedroom apartment. I got it. I moved there January last year. And then something happened, and I found out, I didn't know that they were garnishing my check. So when they garnished my check, I called around to find out what was going on. They garnished my check, and next thing I know, I couldn't pay my rent. So I wound up evicted on the street in September of last year.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And then found the place that you're in now.
Yeah, I found the place where I'm at now. I stay at Lazarus House on 14th Street, where I was raised at, not too far from where I was raised at.
And one of the things, when you and I talked, I was so impressed that through all of this, you've kept your commitment to your schooling and to education. And
Yeah.
talk a little bit about why and what motivates you to keep going there.
Well, there's hope there. There's hope in working at 24 hours a week, hope in school, hope in church, hope in what I do for the community, hope in serving to help others like me.
And are there some things that you would want to tell people as recommendations or advice or things that they should have in their thinking when they're thinking about policies that affect people who are struggling?
Yes, put yourself in my shoes. Let's change places. What would you do if you were me? That's what I have to say. All I want is a chance to do and live a life of abundance, just like everybody else. I was born and raised here in the district. I refuse to leave. I'm not going over the Maryland line or the Virginia line again. I'm going to stay right here where I was born and raised.
And anything else that I didn't ask that you want to be sure to say about something that's been helpful to you or something that's been a challenge that you want to make sure to tell people
Well,
about?
it's people like you all that it gives me some type of faith that, there is somebody out there that is looking at another Lana Clark. There are many Lawanas out there, men, women, children, people that don't have anything. So I just make the best of what I have and, hope for the best.
Well, Debbie asked me to say a few closing things. I, of course, didn't think about how hard it would be to follow you, because that's a very moving and powerful close. Why don't you stay? I'll say a few things that maybe give people a little bit of a sense of how your story fits into data and numbers and all those things about people who are poor and struggling in the country generally. And then if you want to add anything at the close,
Sure.
We'll give you that opportunity. So in thinking about what I wanted to say, now that you've heard that powerful story, I wanted to make give you a few themes of how Lana's story is very typical, and then a couple themes about ways in which it's different from other people. So the first thing that I want you to hear that's really typical when you look at the data is that she's working, right? We hear a lot of talk about whether poor people and low-income people want to work, whether they have to be required to work. In fact, when you look at the data, people are working. And what's happening is that because of too few hours, which is part of your story, or erratic schedules and too low wages, they're working and not able to make ends meet. So if you think about people on SNAP, for example, it's more than half of non-disabled, non-elderly adults who are working while they're on the program, 80% the year before, the year after. You think about Medicaid, health insurance, the biggest increases with the Affordable Care Act have been for the working poor and so forth. So that's very typical. The second thing to take away is that people who are in low-wage jobs and needing help to keep their lives going really want to work in more stable, better jobs. So they're looking for that. It's just for various reasons, it's not there. And so thinking about what it requires to make people's ideal of work real. Is it education and training? Is it a job opportunity, getting a chance to start? What is it that will support and stabilize somebody's life? The third thing is the way I want you to think about is the way that getting some help is necessary to stabilize your life enough that you can even look for work or succeed at work, right? And once you've been evicted, once you're struggling to get food, when you don't have a car and are trying to go in 4 different directions, that's what makes it hard to get and sustain work. And I think one of the things I admire in your story is that you're maintaining this very difficult schedule all over the metropolitan area and without a car, when all of us have our stories just for our little metro rides into work in the morning, and you're trying to make that happen. So I think thinking about the stability that comes from the safety net as a step on the way to work is really important. And the last thing I would say is that your story about looking for a post-secondary degree, looking for a credential, continuing your education, one of the important things to know is that that's also very typical of low-income working people today. And the evidence says that your instinct is right, that to get a decent, stable job today, it actually is really important to have at least a credential post-secondary, post-high school that's recognized by employers. One of the things we work on at CLASP is making sure that people don't have a stereotype in their minds of college students as 18-year-olds right out of high school being supported by their parents. Because today, right, more than half of undergraduates are like you. They're people who are independent, supporting themselves, far more than half in community two-year colleges or among students of color. A quarter of those students are also parents. So people getting an education to help stabilize their lives and help them move up at work are typical of college students, and it's their right to be doing that. The second thing I wanted to do just a moment on is the ways in which you're not typical or not the only person. There are people whose lives are different who also need help and support. And one example of that, it may not feel that way, but being in the district in certain respects is lucky compared to some other states. I'm sure there are ways that it's not. It's a high price place, which is tough. But the district, for example, has adopted the expansion of Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, which is why when you are able to find the time to go back in and sign up, you'll be able to get the glasses and the other things we talked about. 19 states are places where someone in your situation, they aren't even offering that health care for people who are struggling and not getting it through their jobs. So in order to make sure that the safety net programs provide the same basis for support everywhere, it's really important to think about what we can do nationally to keep those programs strong. The second thing is that many low-income struggling people are also raising kids. And again, that offers both some opportunities and some challenges. We talked about this a little bit when we talked before. Someone who's raising children is going to have another demand on their time besides work and school. They're also going to be parenting, and that's very tough. They'll have access to some kinds of help that are bigger than what you have. For example, Luanda talked about her help from her income taxes. For those of you who follow this policy area, the earned income tax credit is very small for people without children. There's bipartisan interest in increasing it, which I suspect would help you. It's bigger for people with kids, so that's a way they have access to more. On the other hand, people with kids are going to really need help with childcare in order to work and go to school, and childcare is deeply inadequately funded. We're reaching at this point probably 1 in 6 of eligible people. So I think where I would close is on something that you said here today and that you said when we talked before, which was of how much you want to contribute and how important it is to you that you and everyone else who wants to contribute has the chance. And what I wanted to close with is that I think for us in this room, it's not only important to you that you have the chance to work and contribute, it's important to the rest of us and to our country, because if we've got a country where someone as dedicated and persistent as you are is not able to contribute to our economy and our society, then we're all losing out. And so I think our motivation is not only that we care about you, but that it really matters to all of us to create that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything you want to add?
Oh, I wanted to add that I am in a play and documentary called How I Got Over. I'm not sure if you all heard of it, but it was 15 women, homeless and in recovery. We did a one-night only stage play. It was called My Soul Looked Back and Wondered, which is now called How I Got Over. And it was a sold-out show, all done at the Terrace Theater at the Kennedy Center. And that was in April 2012, and it was a wonderful, wonderful play. So we're going to do a screening at the Miracle Theater this Sunday in Southeast. So I would like it if you all would go to your Facebook pages, go to How I Got Over Facebook page, and you'll see me smiling. Actually, you'll see me with my mouth open, singing. And, you know, just it's free. And I would like everybody to come out. Bring a friend.
Great.
And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. That was really fun. Thank you. That was really good.
Is the slides working? There we go. Okay. So, hi everybody. My name is Melissa Boteach, and I'm the Vice President of the Poverty to Prosperity Program at the Center for American Progress. I want to start off by thanking Lana and Olivia for grounding our conversation. I think the story that you shared and the context that you provided is so important for both the critique I'm about to provide of Speaker Ryan's plan, as well as the pivot to what we really need to cut poverty and expand opportunity for all. So thank you so much. So the name of my short talk is Better Lipstick, Same Pig, in part because you know, we've seen for several years now a stepped up rhetoric and acknowledgement on the part of conservatives on poverty, but every time we see policy recommendations come out, it tends to be more of the same: work requirements, block grants, things that would actually exacerbate poverty and inequality. But the subheading is also really important because it's not just strategies to push back, it's strategies to pivot then to a progressive agenda, because I want to make the point that what Speaker Ryan's rollout represents is not just a challenge to all of us, but an opportunity. We're seeing unprecedented coverage of poverty and inequality, and now is the time for us to be vocal and out there about the solutions it will take to actually make a difference. There we go. So I'm quickly going to walk through what Speaker Ryan gets wrong about poverty in America, do a little bit of messaging on how to talk about the plan, and then how to pivot to a progressive agenda. Okay. So I think actually Juana did this better than I could. I was going to talk a little bit about how the concept of poverty in America as a consequence of bad decisions, and then we just need people to want to work and require them to work, is so fundamentally flawed. But you can read these slides as well as I can. Roughly 1 in 3 Americans struggle to make ends meet. Juana's story, I think, underscores it and demonstrates it more than ever. People are working. They're working in low-wage, dead-end jobs. They don't have the supports they need to thrive. And when they are unemployed, they're actively searching for work. And so this perception is part of the misguided set of assumptions that got us to a policy proposal from Speaker Ryan that is grounded mainly in what do we need to do to fix poor people and to make them want to work. So one of the things I think that is important to understand, and that Juana's story also represents, is that poverty is not this identity or this stagnant set of experiences. It is musical chairs. If you look at some of the data from census that looks at poverty and hardship over the long term, during the recovery from the Great Recession, about 1 in 3 people experienced a spell of poverty, where only about 4% of the population was in poverty for the entire time. And so this is something we all have a stake in. Other data from Mark Rank and his colleagues show that approximately half of people are going to experience poverty or near poverty during their working years. And when you add in being unemployed or otherwise turning to the safety net, that amounts to about 4 in 5 people who are going to have a year of significant economic hardship. This is about all of us. So when you mischaracterize poverty, it becomes easy to then mischaracterize the safety net and its role and function. And I think Olivia did a fantastic job in dispelling some of that. One of the main myths that's perpetuated in Speaker Ryan's plan is that the war on poverty failed and that these programs are a poverty trap. The reality, analysis from Center on Budget and Policy Priorities has shown that without these vital programs, Social Security, nutrition assistance, tax credits for working families, the poverty rate would be about twice as high today. It doesn't just protect people from hardship, though. The safety net is a tool for economic mobility. Emerging research is beginning to show even more than we previously thought that programs like nutrition assistance, tax credits, housing are boosting people's long-term health outcomes, employment and earnings outcomes, and education outcomes over the long haul. So these programs are a ladder. Finally, as I mentioned before, 70% of Americans at some point will need to turn to the safety net. So I'm going to quickly walk through Ryan's plan in a nutshell. It's a long document, and one of the things that I think is important to note is that no one has repudiated the budget that came out in March that showed that 3/5 of the cuts came from programs for low and moderate income families. So you have this plan that came out seemingly separate from the House Republican budget, but I haven't heard anyone yet repudiate a budget that gets 3/5 of its cuts from programs for low and moderate income people. So I think it is incumbent upon us to ensure that those two things are not divorced and that they are tied together in a way that shows that what this plan is really all about. And if you look at it, if you look at it in terms of both the language in the budget and the language in the plan, it slashes housing when only about 1 in 4 eligible people are currently even getting affordable housing programs. It attacks SSI for children. It advances a threat of a block grant for child nutrition programs going after school lunch, and it cuts Head Start and child care, proposes cuts to those when currently only about 1 in 6 eligible children are getting that support. In addition, student loans, it increases the student loan burden, which would affect people who are trying to go back to school at night while working. And it cuts jobless benefits or proposes rolling back jobless benefits, which currently only about 1 in 4 unemployed workers is getting unemployment insurance. One of the things I found most striking about the plan, in addition to the language about slapping work requirements on many programs and code words for block granting, consolidating, streamlining, et cetera, the word block grant is not readily apparent, it's all code, is that it somehow thinks that rolling back consumer protections are going to help people in poverty. So the administration has a new rule out on payday, which it proposes to block, on protecting people from bad financial advice, which it proposes to roll back. I fail to understand how this will protect people from poverty. As I mentioned before, in terms of the messaging, it's really critical to ensure that this is not a separate conversation from a budget that gets 3/5 of its cuts from programs for low and moderate income people. The proposals are spelled C-U-T. We're going to talk a little bit about this later on in the program, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but Liz Schott here is going to speak about why TANF is not a model for other programs, and a lot of this is based on misguided principles that inform TANF. The other thing that I think is important to note is that Ryan cloaks his plan in language about evidence-based, and saying that, we need to ground our proposals in evidence. Well, one of the resources we have outside and online for those of you listening on the web is 3 ways to tell if someone is serious about evidence-based policy. Well, I'll give you a clue. One of the first things is they don't ignore existing evidence. And we have evidence that nutrition assistance, for example, boosts long-term health outcomes. So why would a plan grounded in evidence/nutrition assistance? I'll give you another clue. It doesn't cut evidence collection and data collection. Well, if you want to make policy based on evidence, you have to fund evidence collection. That doesn't work. And then finally, the third test is, are your alternatives based on evidence? Well, as Liz will discuss, TANF has at best a mixed record and is not a model for other programs. So if we're basing a new plan on poverty or a proposed plan on poverty in TANF, that doesn't seem very evidence-based to me. So one of the things that I want to spend the rest of my time really focused on is what's not in Ryan's plan. I've touched upon what's in it. I think almost or just as interesting is what is not in it. And for someone who speaks a lot about work requirements, where are the jobs? Where's the job creation? Where are the efforts to boost wages? Where are the work supports that enable people to get and to keep a job? Those things are not in the plan. And so what we have here is a case of rhetoric versus reality. We have someone who says, what do we want? A healthy economy. A big part of that is having a strong safety net, both for those who can't help themselves and for those who just need a helping hand. Well, the reality, voting against a minimum wage increase for cuts to nutrition assistance and cuts to Medicaid is not consistent with that statement. So if you're serious about cutting poverty, what do we need to be for? How do we use this challenge of Speaker Ryan's plan and rollout as an opportunity when the media is focused on this issue to get out a bold proposal on poverty? Center for American Progress just last week released a progressive blueprint to cut poverty and expand opportunity, which proposes to do just that. The executive summary is outside, and the full report is available online. We released it with Whit Poyer, Representative DeLauro, and Representative Moore, Senator Sherrod Brown, and Neera, the president and CEO of Center for American Progress, all discussing this at the exact same time that Speaker Ryan was rolling out his plan in Anacostia. I want to underscore that the power of the pivot is not just critiquing Speaker Ryan's plan, which we all need to do and do effectively, and hopefully I've armed you with some tools to do that. But most of the articles that critique Speaker Ryan's plan included a mention of either CAP's progressive blueprint or our event. And I think that's because we have failed if this becomes a referendum on a bad set of proposals. What we need to have this be is a conversation, a national discussion, and a debate about how do we best cut poverty. And to do that, we have to be out there on what the solutions are. Job creation, infrastructure, education, research, raising the minimum wage, ensuring basic labor standards, such as paid sick days, fair schedules, ensuring basic living standards. So rather than just saying don't cut vital programs, how do we strengthen? How do we expand EITC for childless adults? How do we invest in childcare and early education? How do we have a young child tax credit for those early years when kids most need that boost in income? Work-family policies that would close the gender pay gap, paid family medical leave, investments in education and training that help people get ahead, and removing barriers to opportunity, something else Speaker Ryan doesn't much address in his plan, so that a child's zip code doesn't determine her life outcomes, or a fair shot for workers with disabilities, ensuring that a criminal record is not a life sentence to poverty. These and other related resources are available online and out back, but I want to thank you all for the opportunity to share a little bit of background on Speaker Ryan's plan, how to talk about it, and what the real solutions are. Thank you so much.
Liz starts, sorry. I just want to remind people about writing out questions. In the middle of Liz's presentation, we'll be picking them up. And I hope you won't find that distracting, but
No,
thank
no, I was just trying to find out how to get the presentation up there, but I hear it's taken care of, and that's great. And we'll just do a little testing on how to go forward and back. Good afternoon. My part of this program is, my task here is to focus on the what doesn't work part of the title of this event. And I've worked on TANF for 20 years at the national level, all around the country, so at the state level all around the country. And so I want to spend my time here talking about why TANF is not a model to reduce poverty or to promote work or to promote opportunity, and it's not an approach that should be extended to other safety net benefits such as food or housing. And I have three main points I'm going to make. Okay, so if I press forward, the green arrow, there we go. Okay. So despite all the claims of success, the facts and the evidence show that for many families, TANF has failed to provide either a safety net or job preparation and opportunity to work. And the result is that we've had a large number of families who are disconnected from work and from benefits. And extreme poverty, which we define as living on $2 per day per person. This is very, very little money. We talked about how hard it is to live on $1,000 a month. $2 a day per person is a fraction of that. That number of families in extreme poverty has more than doubled under TANF. And TANF's not a model for work requirements either. It's touted as such a model, but in fact, instead of offering effective work programs, work requirements under TANF have often meant that many families just become poor because they lose connection to work and to cash. And those are the families that are the most vulnerable and have the greatest barriers. And finally, TANF's not a model on how to fund safety net programs. And Melissa talked about block grant may not be, the word block grant's not there, but there's code in a number of places. And TANF's flexibility on the use of funds and has led to so much money being spent outside of the core welfare reform areas of work, childcare, and temporary basic assistance. So the good news is that's my only bullet point. All the rest, if we get there, it's pictures. These are graphics and they're evidence-based. So what we have seen under TANF is caseload decline. That's often touted. But if you look at, let me get my colors here. So the red line is the AFDC and then TANF cases. The line that represents a caseload is the one that goes down. The line that represents poverty is the one that you see sometimes going up, and that lower line is deep poverty. And what you see is that TANF goes down when poverty was going down, and TANF goes down when poverty goes up. And TANF goes down and even begins to go below deep poverty, and TANF continues to go down. What we've developed, and we talk about often as a way to look at this, is to talk about the TANF to poverty ratio. For every 100 poor families with children, so families that are poor and have children, how many get cash assistance? You wouldn't always expect 100% of them. You wouldn't want 100% getting cash assistance. Cash assistance eligibility limits are much, much below the poverty level. Poverty level, by the way, family of three, $1,680 a month. And certainly people are not all getting TANF, but what we've seen over time is that that number has declined. In 2014, for every 100 poor families with children, 23 received cash assistance from TANF. And that's a big drop from 68 in 1996. And this is the national number. The number varies tremendously across states, and I don't know how well you can see the shading here, but if it's the lighter it is, the worse it is. Just use that as your gauge. In 12 states, this TANF to poverty ratio is single digits. That means fewer than 10 families are receiving TANF cash assistance for every 100 families in poverty. And this is one of the metrics that we use to sort of show the virtual disappearance of TANF. And what this near disappearance of TANF has meant is that TANF is playing it's playing a much smaller role in lifting children, not even out of poverty. We're talking about out of deep poverty, lifting children above half of the poverty line. So TANF is lifting 1.5 million fewer children above half the poverty line than AFDC did before, and that's what the difference in those two bars. So, and as I said earlier, the extreme poverty that has happened under TANF is part of what's happened. So there are some people who do get TANF cash assistance, and what the benefits they get are very low. The benefits in DC for a family of three, the full benefits for a family of three are actually fairly typical, about $429, I think, for a family of three. I'm not sure how you pay your rent in DC on $429. You can't pay it on $1,000. So, and you need to have some bedrooms when you've got your three kids. One of the arguments for the flexibility under TANF is states would be able to reinvest the money. One of the places they didn't reinvest the money was in creating stability, greater stability for the temporary cash assistance. Okay, you're here for a bit. Let's focus on getting your work skills. Let's give you a sufficient amount of monthly assistance so that you can go to school and maybe work part-time and that you can be stable. But what we see is, and again, I don't know how well you can see this, but light is bad. And the darkest blue is benefits that are maybe 40 to 50% of the federal poverty level. The lightest colors are benefits that are more like 10%, 20% of the federal poverty level. So, finally, the other thing that we have seen under TANF is the failure to respond to the recession. So what we have here is, and the block grant structure and the flexibility that states have had is a big part of that story. In many states, states simply did not respond to the increased need. And so the TANF caseload here is the red line on the bottom, the one that has a very little growth around the recession, but then continues to go down. And contrast that to the blue line, which is the SNAP caseload. And you can see the difference in structure in SNAP made it a much more responsive program to the increased need. So as the number of unemployed, that yellow line went up, TANF barely budged. So I want to pivot now to the issue of work requirements, because what we're seeing is TANF's not serving folks, it's not serving them with cash aid, but that also means as you have fewer and fewer unemployed parents getting cash aid, they're also not getting help. And that's not what TANF has been providing people. They haven't been providing them skills, work preparation, or this so-called path to opportunity. This slide is debuting. This has two lines and two different data sets here, but what's the most striking thing about the picture is the divergence of the two lines. So the line on the top, the blue line, is that's the number of non-employed single parents who are not employed. The line on the bottom, it's red, is the number of adults on TANF, or before that AFDC, who are not employed. So what you see here from this chart and the increasing divergence over time is that as the number of single parents without work grew and the economy weakened, TANF served fewer and fewer. TANF was not helping them get connected to work. TANF was not providing temporary assistance in the meantime. It neither helped them help provide a home for their kids, nor helped connect them to work. So what you really want is, you do want effective work programs. And there are families that, particularly the most vulnerable families and those with the most limited work experience and work skills, that you do want to help get connected to better skills, better job preparation, and employment. But the research and the evidence from a lot of the so-called success of work requirements really doesn't show that. The research shows, and this is often from the early years of TANF, or actually some of them, a lot of them are waivers that sort of bridged the AFDC TANF period. The research is showing that that those programs aren't as successful as are touted. The employment increases were modest, and even those gains faded over time. And in fact, the parents with the greatest barriers, the ones that needed the help the most to get to work, benefited the least, and often weren't connected to work, even in the programs that were otherwise considered successful. So, and the most vulnerable families often became poorer because they were cut off or kept off. And a lot of what we see in TANF, we see a lot of families that are cut off due to sanctions. We also see a lot of people who can't seem to get on. They can't seem to get on. A lot of states have some kind of front-end barriers, because don't forget, there is no bottom line here. There is no federal protections. There's very little in terms of anything that states can't do, and the race to the bottom. In 1996, I think we used the term the race to the bottom, and I don't think we really envisioned the different forms in which it would take. We are seeing right now next month in Arizona, a 12-month time limit is going to get put into effect, and families are going to get cut off at the shortest time limit in the country. I talked earlier about some of the TANF to poverty ratios. That's another place where we're seeing a race to the bottom, where you've got states in single digits, and the lowest state is 4. For every 100 poor families, 4. We're seeing TANF benefit levels actually declining again, as they've eroded over time, and states have actually made cuts, because in Arizona, they cut the time limit, they cut the benefits, because they're taking the money for other things, which actually is the segue to my last slide here. The flexibility. The flexibility on spending, and I've already talked a little bit about the flexibility on eligibility policies. And as Melissa said, there's code words for block grant, merge funding streams, et cetera, in a lot of places, and we don't think we've heard the last of it. TANF is really a cautionary tale on how to spend the money. If we think of the original argument in the 90s was, well, as caseloads decline, as people go to work, doing a block grant will give the states the flexibility so that they can take the money they're not spending on cash assistance and put it into work supports and work programs and training and childcare. But that's not what we're seeing. In fact, if you look at this, the blue wedges here, that's what I would call core welfare reform. A quarter of this pie is basic cash assistance. And those other two wedges, 8% on work, 16% on childcare. And actually, states are spending less on work and childcare than they did a decade ago. So instead, what we've got, if you take the admin and EITC, what you've got is that big wedge up in the corner, 1/3 in other areas. And in some states, that this is even a more distorted pie. And we have these for every state up on our website, not the CHN website, but the CBPP website. And you end up with maybe the blue, all 3 of those core welfare reforms might be less than a quarter of the money. And the other areas of state budget, that gray wedge could be 3/4 of the money. So states have really not used this money in a way to further what welfare reform was supposed to be about, and they're using it a lot for state fiscal relief. And that's the flexibility, both the funding flexibility and the eligibility has really been a big part of that. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks to everyone. We're going to break to ask a few questions. Thank you for those of you who have submitted them. So I will sort of single out who I think might be the best to answer these, and if that person would come up and sit down by a mic. So here's a very interesting question. It says, this week, Representative Jackie Walorski from Indiana, Republican Indiana, who's the Ag Subcommittee Chair, wrote in the Elkhart Times, she speaks, I'm quoting this, rather eloquently about the dilemma of the welfare cliff. She then states that's why she is supporting Ryan's plan, which, quote, which makes the transition into work easier. What part of the plan is she referring to? So it's a sort of a trick question here, but maybe if I could ask, Melissa, would you hate being asked this question? And maybe you look, and Olivia, if you both want to come up a little bit by a mic and see if you have a way of reacting to this question.
So people probably know what the cliff means. It means the idea that for some people who are going to work, they face an obstacle created by safety net programs that might make it harder for them, say, to work more hours, because then they would lose dollars. And I think there are a couple of headlines. The first one is, that's thinking about what these programs looked like 20 years ago. Today, the SNAP program, the Medicaid program, and above all, the Earned Income Tax Credit help you in a way that works as you earn more money. So, for example, with the Affordable Care Act, those states that have adopted Medicaid expansion, parents no longer have to worry that if they go to work full-time that they might lose their health insurance. It's going to be there for them. The Earned Income Tax Credit actually provides more resources for low-wage workers. There are still really important cliffs. The biggest one is childcare, and that's a basic idea about we don't have enough money in the program. So it is absolutely true that a state may be in the situation where its limit for childcare help is really, really low, and it can't help you even though you really need it. Turning that back to the Ryan plan, the idea that has often been in the proposals on poverty from Mr. Ryan and others is that flexibility to the states will help address cliff effects. But in fact, the Child Care Block Grant is a good example of why it doesn't. That's a very flexible program, but the problem is not enough money. It's like trying to pull a sheet to fit over a bed that's too small, right? If you don't have enough money, you're not going to be able to help both the person who's just starting out and the person who's maybe working at minimum wage, but there's no way they can afford $8,000 or $10,000 or $12,000 a year for childcare for a young child. So I think the answer is the existing safety net does way better than it used to. The plan doesn't have help in it, and the solution is to really invest in some key areas.
Good answer.
I would agree with everything that Olivia said, unsurprisingly. And I would also say that I think some of the people who make this argument sometimes, especially conservatives, are the same ones who come out of as opposed to Medicaid expansion, which in the 19 states that haven't expanded it yet is one of the few remaining cliffs. for people to not be able to get access to health insurance. The is real with the child care issue is very important, but programs like the EITC, the child tax credit, are also very important to reward work and ensure that people are getting that tax refund.
Thanks. Melissa, while I've got you up there, there's a question. The Ryan Task Force plan calls for replacing cash aid for poor children with disabilities with services. What's wrong with that?
A lot. So I mean, I think that the main answer is that children need both. And if you have access to doctor, but you can't afford the transportation to get there, or if you need medication, but your family is about to plunge into homelessness, and so you don't have a refrigerator to store it, I mean, it's not an either or proposition. Families with children with disabilities are among the most likely to face hardship, poverty, and even potentially homelessness. And in order to help those families, I mean, SSI is not a hugely generous program. And so there is an importance for making sure those families have the income to afford the same basic needs that other children have, but also the services. So pitting them against one another is unhelpful and contradictory.
Thank you. Well, here's a question about education. Could be a Liz answer, could be an Olivia answer, but so education provides the best bridge to get out of poverty. So this is a question, to paraphrase: how can we get all kinds of levels of education to provide that bridge better to help people get out of poverty? And how can we prepare educators to assist better in helping people who have low income? So either of you want to jump into that? Or okay, we can. Sure, I seem to be getting nominated. And this is Elizabeth Lower-Basch, who I will introduce soon to moderate a panel that's coming up.
So I think there's two parts of the question. One is about sort of once people are receiving benefits, how can we make sure that these systems connect people to education and training? And one of the failures of TANF, which Liz did not have time to get into, is that it has significantly restricted access to education and training for the people who are participating, so that it's harder for them, as Lana is doing, to go to school and get to a better job. So that is definitely a challenge. There are opportunities to do better that states can take up under both TANF and SNAP. And then more broadly, I'd say the education system has a lot of issues that low-income children often do not go to high-quality schools. So there's a lot of work to be done on that, as well as meeting kids' basic needs so that they can succeed in school. That we know school lunches, Medicaid, all of these make it possible for students to succeed.
Thank you. Any other? Okay. I do have one for Luana. So if you want to join us up here, and it's one we guess someone might ask. But Luana, if you got a chance to talk with Speaker Paul Ryan, what would you tell him? And we don't have a lot of time, but are there there are other members of Congress who might also like this message, but Speaker Ryan, tell us what you think. Yep.
I would tell him the same thing that I said before. Put yourself in my shoes. I think people are just like seeing just the surface. They're not coming out, in the neighborhoods to see actually how people live. They assume that everyone is an alcoholic or drug addict or, whatever their barriers may be, or a person of incarceration they think that these people are not trying to do better. Well, yes, we are. We are trying to better our lives. It's not how I start, it's how I finish.
Excellent answer. Well, because everyone has been so concise in their answers, we have time for one more question right now, and I will say that we will be able to take more questions at the very end as well. But there is a question, we've heard about how the TANF block grant is not an effective program. But are there any other kinds of block grants that have worked better than TANF? And I don't know whether, Liz, if you want to take that, or anybody can jump right in.
Well, I think that one of the things that I think it's important to do is to make a distinction between benefits and services. And when you're talking about certain kinds of services, the social services block grant, although the social services block grant was created in I was there, you weren't. And under some of these arguments about flexibility and merge funding streams, and now we hear, well, we should get rid of it because we don't know what it goes for. But when you're talking about basic safety net programs, no. And the other thing, and there is a paper on our website on this next point, which is the evidence shows that block grants have consistently been eroded over time. One thing I did not have time to mention is that the TANF block grant, which is the same level of funding that it was in 1996, has declined by over 1/3. And that's not unusual, this consistent decline and withdrawal of money over time. So block grant is also spelled C-U-T. And so it's not that there isn't flexibility that's appropriate for some types of services, but it's certainly not appropriate for safety net benefit programs, the kinds of benefits that we're talking about.
Great,
Okay,
thank
no,
you very much.
I'm sure Olivia's wants me to say that the Child Care Development Block Grant has been largely successful, but it is a very focused block grant compared to the others. It really funds child care.
And I was also going to say that it shares the same problem of shrinking funding, and that's important.
Okay. Well, so that was a good interlude. Thank you for your insightful questions. So now I will fully introduce Elizabeth Lower-Basch from the Center for Law and Social Policy, who will bring up our panel of experts, and they'll go on for about a half an hour.
Liz, you going to come up too? Oh, yeah. So with this terrific panel, it's going to be a little bit of a speed dating round where I get to ask very quick questions of people who can talk about these subjects for much, much longer. So let me just very quickly introduce the panel. We've got Jim Weil from the Food Research and Action Center, or FRAC, Sarita Gupta from Jobs with Justice, and David Bowers from Enterprise Community Partners. So why don't we just jump right in? And Sarita, I'm going to start with you. Mm-hmm. So as we've heard, there's been a lot of discussion of work requirements lately, but also that, as we've heard, many people are working but not earning enough to support themselves and their families. And what are the main things that people should understand about the low-wage labor market and how it affects families? I know that's a really big question for a short time.
Yeah. No, so in a speed round version, I'll just say, so working in the low-wage market is unpredictable and unstable, as we heard from Luana and thank you so much for getting up here and sharing your story. Some of the lowest paying jobs are in the service sector right now, which is also where we not only see very low wages, but erratic schedules. And that means people are earning too low in terms of wages, but they're also not working enough hours, as we've heard, or they're often don't know when they're going to work. And so this makes it incredibly difficult to budget, to plan for budgets. It makes it hard to arrange childcare childcare or elder care if you have a caregiving role in your family. It's hard to continue with education or job training. If we want to help get people onto pathways into better and good existing jobs in our economy, it makes it incredibly difficult to do that, or even to hold down a second job, because most people in these positions are actually on call. They have on-call schedules where they are held on call, they're not paid for that time, and that means if their employer calls them, they have to go in no matter what. So you can't look for a second job or get another job. And on top of that, Olivia talked about this, but couple that with no kind of national paid leave or time off to care for your loved ones, let alone childcare supports. It just makes it so difficult in the low-age market. And I'll just end by saying that what this really gets at also in this moment when we see fast food, men and women who work in the fast food industry and restaurant industry and nannies and childcare providers like standing up and mobilizing for better wages and the fight for 15 and whatnot, which is really exciting. What it also demonstrates is how little say people who work in these sectors have over their jobs right now. And that part of what we have to do, and that's largely due to weak labor laws, there's a lot we need to do to create the space for working women and men in these sectors to really have a say over their work.
Okay, thank you. So shifting slightly to some of the supports that people receive that help them support themselves and their families in spite of these conditions. Jim, why don't you just talk to us a little about the difference that SNAP, or the program that used to be food stamps, makes in people's lives and well-being, both in the short term but also over time? What does the evidence tell us about that?
Sure. So there's really been a flood of both new research and new compilations of existing and new research over the last couple of years from the White House, from the Council on Economic Advisors, in a fabulous compilation of essays called SNAP Matters, from FRAC, from the Center on Budget, from Children's Health Watch, from peer-reviewed journals, from the Hamilton Project at Brookings. So I recommend everybody take a week or two and go look at this stuff. So I have 2.5 minutes left to describe what's in it. First, the new research that accounts for the underreporting of participation in programs when people are telling census what programs they receive, and matches up the poverty data to the actual program administrative data, tells us that more than 10 million people are lifted out of poverty by the SNAP program, which is basically the equivalent number to the ITC and the child tax credit. So SNAP is lifting as many people above the poverty line as the tax credits are. It's obviously, SNAP has a huge impact on food insecurity, lifts millions of households and kids particularly out of food insecurity. But as I may get to a little bit later, benefits are too limited to fully lift all the beneficiaries, or huge numbers of them, out of food insecurity. But it lessens food insecurity for millions of people. And we learned during the Recovery Act, when benefits were temporarily higher for 3 years, that modestly higher benefits make the program even more effective in reducing hunger and food insecurity. Third, it affects families because families have more money to spend on food and don't have to spend scarce cash on food, other resources. It makes people, it makes more possible for people to pay their rents to avoid eviction, makes it more possible for people to get timely medical care. So it has effects throughout the needs systems of low-income people. Fourth, in terms of the long-term effects, SNAP receipt at an early age, prenatal 0 to 5, has been shown to have effects among adults, particularly among adult women, in reducing metabolic syndrome, improving their health, improving their employability, raising educational levels. And the studies for the 5 to 18-year-olds have been more limited, but are starting to see the same things like improvement in educational levels. And the last thing I'd say, since I'm probably already over my time, is unlike TANF, as has been discussed in the rest of this panel, TANF basically was flat, shrank during the recession. So the impact of SNAP is not just on families, on households, on individuals getting it, but on communities and on the nation as a whole, because it's such a hugely effective counter-cyclical program when the regional or local or national economy is in the dumpster.
Thank you. So, David, we've already heard about how housing is one of the biggest expenses in many people's budgets. But housing assistance only currently reaches about 1 in 4 of the families who qualify for it because of limited funding again. Can you talk to us from the work that you've done, what you've heard about the difference that it makes in a family when they're able to get assistance and it stabilizes their budget?
Sure, absolutely, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. Share a couple quick stories about what this really looks like. I'm always intrigued when I used to work on Capitol Hill and on appropriations work, when folks would talk about numbers as cold kind of data points and wouldn't really connect with the human impact of what that really means. So I met a World War II veteran at a grand opening of a housing development here in Washington, D.C., done by Transitional Housing Corporation and Somerset Development. Came back from the war, African-American man, so there are only some parts of this city that he was allowed to live in. So he and his wife moved there. He had low-income, low-wage jobs throughout his life. But when we talked to him, and he was still working, this man was well into his 70s, was still working, providing assistance there at the development. He talked about how proud he was of the fact that he and his wife had raised their daughters, their 3 daughters, put them through college. And he and his wife would enjoy Redskins games on Sundays and would fuss and argue with one another. You think about that neighborhood now would be well beyond the price point that he and his wife could afford. But here's a man who served his country, came back, and because of local resources largely, some federal, but local resources as well, allowed he and his wife to stay in their, not their unit, in their home, in the home where they raised their daughters, where they loved one another, right? That's what it means when you can have affordable housing. Okay, second story, another veteran comes back from the Iraq War, serves his country, has trouble readjusting, is struggling to make it, gets connected with Montgomery Housing Partnership in Montgomery County, Maryland, one of the wealthiest counties in the country. Also, we know this is one of the highest cost real estate markets in the country. So what does it mean when you're a veteran and you come back from war and you can't afford a place to live? Imagine that. You risk your life and you come back and cannot afford a place to live, a home. Worked with MHP, and they were able to provide him, connect him, working with the VA, to services and housing that he could afford that allowed him to have stability in his life, get some of the counseling and services that he needed. And now this gentleman is working, has a good job, and is living in, again, a home for him that provides stability. When we think about the fact that 20% of Americans pay more than half of their income for their housing costs, imagine that. Every dollar you make, at least 50 cents, oftentimes 60 or 70 cents of every dollar you make just goes to keep the lights on. So forget about health care, forget about food, forget about education, forget about clothes, and no, player, you're not going to the movie this weekend. You and your kids aren't going out because you can't afford it. So when we are able to provide housing that people can afford, it provides that stability, that grounding that allows all sorts of people to do what all of us, many of us, take for granted, and that's just live life.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Liz to come back up here and talk with us as well. Yes, there's another seat there. And so as we talked about, as Melissa said, we need to talk about sort of the positive agenda going forward of how these programs could be even better than they are now. Because while definitely they make a huge difference in people's lives, none of us are going to say they're perfect and couldn't be improved. We all have great ideas for how to make them even better. So I think we'll just go down the line and give each of you a chance to say, what do you think would be an important federal policy change that would make these programs work better? And the timing is perfect because...
We have to change our...
Okay, we're going to hold it off. We're going to let the speaker...
We're rolling here. We are so incredibly pleased and grateful that House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi can join us, and we know that her schedule is unpredictable, and we've already been hearing about how hard that is for low-income people, but it's hard for our champions to. Leader Pelosi, you are a leader working tirelessly to get the best possible outcomes for low-income people, strategizing brilliantly, passionately committed to justice and opportunity. We are so grateful for your work and for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for your very kind words, but more importantly, thank you all for being here as a show of values. Thank you for your leadership to all of you. And Lana, I heard, was just unbelievable. Thank you for sharing your story, which was more eloquent than any policy statements any of us can make. I think it's really important just to enlarge the issue as to what is our country. Even our founders said liberty and justice for all. Justice, economic justice, social justice, environmental justice. Even they said in the Declaration, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what do we have but a situation that took a couple of centuries to get us to a place where there's a full recognition of our responsibilities to each other. And that is seriously threatened by some of the things that are proposed there. I say to my colleagues, the budget is supposed to be a statement of our national values. What is important to us as a nation should be reflected in how we make our investments in education and protecting the clean air and the rest of the investments that we make for the good of the people and the protection of the people. So I say, show me your values, show me your budget, show me your values. And their budget is brutal. Their budget is brutal. It's a road to ruin. It's a terrible thing. But even it is not bad enough for the Tea Party or whatever they call themselves now in their party. So they couldn't pass a budget. So now they're going through this song and dance about how much they're going to help lift people out of poverty. But don't count, we will never raise the minimum wage. Oh, really? So what are we talking about here? We're talking about rhetoric, or we're talking about reality in people's lives. I can say this with all the respect in the world for my colleagues, but they could never do what you did, Ramona. They could never do what you did. And they claim to have done what they did without any help from anybody. No public education, no nothing, right? They're just great. They're just lucky. But the fact is that this is very serious, because it certainly is serious because what it means in the lives of individual people and their aspirations. It's important as to what it means in a sense of community that makes us all so strong. It's important in the character of our country. My motivation to being in politics at all is that I'm a mother of 5, grandmother of 9 now, but grandmother of 5 at the time I ran, and it just killed me that I have these 5 wonderful children and all the advantages they have, not just, I'm not talking economic, I mean just in terms of the time that I had to be with them, and my husband and I, and priorities, we established them as our priority as we raised them, and that other children in our country, 1 in 5, were going to sleep hungry at night in the greatest country that ever existed in the history of the world. 1 in 5 and 4 now maybe live in poverty in America, and what are we doing about that? Except saying we're not going to raise the minimum wage because it's going to hurt the deficit. We're not going to raise the minimum wage because we're going to lose jobs. What? So it's about what we all say. It's about the dignity and worth of every person, the spark of divinity, all God's children. We talk about that in a religious setting, but as I say of them, and you caught me in a mood, but I say of them is they pray in church on Sunday and then they prey on poor people the rest of the week. And it's just astounding. If you saw what they were doing on the nutrition bill to cut 3 million kids out of school lunches and 22 million kids having a reduction in their reduction in the nutrition that they receive, and for them to say in a meeting and full with the press there and everything else, these kids aren't hungry, they're obese. And you're saying, well, we're talking about nutrition. We're talking about them getting what they should have. Now, it all comes down to the bigger picture. what are elections about? And I'm not here to talk politics with you. I want everybody to agree with us. We want to win on the issues. If the Republicans come to our way of thinking, may they rule forever. But we have to make sure they know what people care about. And they have a trickle-down economic theory. Tax breaks for the rich, special interest tax breaks for special interest. That's the formula for success for America, because it will trickle down. But if it doesn't, and that would be good, but if it doesn't, that's the free market. So be it. And as we'd had pens made, so be it. So be it. And by the way, when we give these tax breaks, they cost money to the budget, right? They're a tax expenditure. It costs money to give tax breaks, so we better go balance the budget by taking food out of the mouths of babies. Limiting Pell Grants and what we can spend and how interest is paid on student loans and the rest of that. And you know what? It's all false economy. It's all ridiculous. It's stupid because nothing, for example, brings more money to the Treasury than the education of the American people. So when they say to me, why would we take away $38 billion in tax breaks for big oil to reduce the deficit when we can just cut Pell Grants by that much? Can you imagine? I said, may I tell people that you said that? Oh yeah, it's in our plan. But nothing. They are increasing the deficit by reducing investments in education. Earliest childhood, K through 12, higher education, post-grad, lifetime learning for our workers. But it's all of a piece. In this very room yesterday, we were talking about this with our friends in labor. It's all of a piece. No increase in the minimum wage, no equal pay for equal work. Can you imagine? You would think that would be the easiest thing they had to do. Do they have sisters? Do they have moms? I don't know. Maybe they sprung from the house of head of Zeus or something. You would think they did by their immigration policy, right? They just landed here. But in any case, in any event, it's a plan. We don't raise the minimum wage. We don't allow collective bargaining. We limit the power of the National Labor Relations Board, OSHA, and all the protections. Honest to God, you would think that if you put coal ash all over your face, you'd be the most beautiful person in the world because they're piling it into the water. All these degradations of the environment and that environmental justice issue and what it is. So there's a lot at stake. What I told them yesterday was about Arnold Toynbee. And Arnold Toynbee said at the beginning of a country, there is a creative minority who will be like the leaders, and they and their purpose is for people to prosper, and then a civilization blossoms. Or they can turn into this controlling minority that is there to exploit the poor, the workers, the people, and that becomes a schism in the soul of a society, a schism in the soul of a country. We just can't give them that much power. We have to make sure, forgetting elections, that's so unimportant. They have to be sure that people of faith, people of a sense of community, people are patriotic and love America, that our values are that we are a community and that we have to make our decisions in a way that is respectful of the dignity and worth of every person. And that's what a democracy is about. Just as an aside, I would just say one way we can improve everything is to reduce the role of money in politics and overturn Citizens United, but that's another subject for another day. Another day. But that's why you're such an inspiration. That's why I thank you so much for what you are doing, because information, facts, data, evidence, well, this is an evidence-free zone here in the Congress, but nonetheless, your help in making it, establishing the facts about what the real impact of all of this can destroy illusions that some of them may have. Or maybe they won't, but they have to know what you think about it. So thank you for making your voices heard, unleashing your power on this subject, and making the difference I know that you will make. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
So that was really quite the hard act to follow, but fortunately, I'm not the one who has to answer this question. So it was really just your opportunity to talk a little about what would be a positive vision going forward to improve these programs.
Which end of the table are we
I was
starting?
going to start with you. Sorry, Jim.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Very quickly, on the FRAC website, there's a document called Plan to End Hunger in America, an 8-point plan, and I'm not going to go through it all here, but basically starting with wages and working through SNAP and child nutrition improvements and other program improvements, it lays out a clear path to end hunger in this country. The most important thing that can be done in the SNAP program is to raise benefits. The SNAP benefits are based on the so-called Thrifty Food Plan, a monthly allotment that is almost universally agreed not to be adequate to get families through the month. And we see those effects in studies showing that kids on food stamps aren't doing as well in school at the end of the month, that hungry adults, seniors with diabetes, more likely to be hospitalized at the end of the month, and so forth. As I mentioned earlier, from 09 to 13, there was a boost in SNAP benefits from the Recovery Act that made a huge difference in the food insecurity rates, improved child health. One Massachusetts study showed that it reduced Medicaid costs in the state. And the Institute of Medicine had a special panel looking at the adequacy of the SNAP, of the Thrifty Food Plan allotment in SNAP, and found that for most families, the allotment simply isn't enough to get them through the month. So we need to move the USDA has 4 levels of food plans: high cost, moderate cost, low cost, and then the poor people's plan through Thrifty Food Plan. We need to move the plan up towards the low cost food plan. When you ask low income, moderate income families how much they need for food, their answer is right in the range of the low cost food plan, and that's where we need to move it. Just one other quick point there. The second key thing doing the program is there are some very large arbitrary eligibility exclusions came out of the '96 welfare law. For most adult legal immigrants are excluded from food stamps. As you all know, most non-disabled adults with dependents, without dependents, face 3 month a time limit of 3 months benefits in every 36 months. So we have to deal with those exclusions. That would be the second highest priority.
All right, so I'll dive in here. It is amazing to speak after Speaker Pelosi because she said so much in that short period of time. But just want to lift up again basic labor standards that just have to be improved. And so there's been a lot of mention, and she mentioned raising the minimum wage, and it's ridiculous that it's such a battle to have done. But I also want to bring attention to how many people who are living in poverty who do in fact work with tipped wages, which is only $2.13 an hour. Just imagine for a moment trying to survive on $2.13 an hour, because that is the reality for way too many people in America today who are working. So tipped wages, and all that means, minimum wage, tipped wages, it just means people are having to make ridiculous choices between paying for rent, paying for food, paying for diapers, paying for medicine, childcare, et cetera. So that is real. But I also want to talk about this issue of scheduling because it's so, so important. And here we are in the halls of, on Capitol Hill. Congress runs on a schedule. Elected representatives have actual predictable schedules. They know what days they're in DC, they know what days they're in their district because they have enormous, demands on their time, but they have predictable work schedules. But guess what? For millions of people working in retail and in the food sector, that kind of predictability that allows you to budget from week to week is not a reality for too many people. So I just want to mention, We've been working on predictable scheduling campaigns across the country, and at the federal level, we have the Schedules That Work Act that is really, really critical to ensure that everyone has the right to request a predictable schedule and protect those working in industries with the worst scheduling practices so they can access more stable hours and have a decent life. So again, imagine yourself if you from week to week don't know when you're going to work, how many hours of time you're going to get, like how many hours of work you're actually going to get. How in the world are you supposed to plan your life? How? And plan with money, limited resources that you have. So this is really serious. So not only is it good policy, I just want to mention it's also good politics. 72% of Americans, including 62% of Republicans, favor requiring chain stores and fast food outlets to give workers at least 2 weeks' notice of any changes in their work schedules to provide them with any extra pay. So I think it's a really important piece. The other piece I want to lift up is what Speaker Pelosi mentioned as she was listing off the things we need to do, which is her deep appreciation and our understanding of how our current labor laws are just outdated and they haven't been able to keep up with modern workplace needs. And what we see in the case of fast food workers, restaurant workers, a lot of workers in low-wage sectors who are really trying to change their working conditions and their wages is they're being retaliated against by employers. So I do feel like it's important to lift up the Wage Act as an important piece of policy. It's a crucial first step in making sure that working women and men are protected when they do come together to make the jobs better for themselves and to create more opportunity for themselves and their coworkers. This is critical to making sure they can negotiate with their employers for, again, better wages, better working conditions, time off to care, all of those very important issues that allow for them to have a decent life. So those would be just a few policy pieces to lift up.
Thank you.
In the housing arena, I'll give you 4 buckets real quick. Number one, the Cantwell-Hatch, Senators Cantwell and Hatch have a bill that's been introduced that would increase funding for the low-income housing tax credit by 50% over 10 years. The tax credit, housing credit, has been the primary tool that has driven the production of new units and preservation of units of housing that serve low-income households. So that would be number one. Number two, and it leverages private dollars, so which would be key about that. Second would be universal vouchers for those who are making below 30% of area median income. Let me put that in context. Area median income in this area where we are sitting is about $108,000 for a family of 4. So if you're making less than 30% of the area median income, that means your household only brings in less than about $32,000, $33,000 a year. We live in an area, and I don't have to tell you all, where the average rent for a one-bedroom runs anywhere from $1,800 to $2,200 for a one-bedroom. I see someone nodding their head, so that's kind of a quiet amen, so you know what I'm saying, right? So imagine that. So if your household makes less than $30,000, you got to pay $2,000 a month for your rent. You're in a hard way. You're in a hard way. So again, the notion of where our budget is, our values are represented, universal vouchers for those making less than 30% of area median income. Third thing would be talking about subsidies, right? Mortgage interest deduction reform, MID reform, needs to happen. I tell people that when we have conversations about who lives in subsidized housing, I always like to be very explicit. I am not a low-income person. I live alone. I'm not a low-income person. I'm blessed to be making a certain amount of money. I have subsidized housing. It's when I itemize my taxes with my accountant every year, I take the mortgage interest deduction. That is government support for my housing costs. So I live in subsidized housing just like folks do who are making less than 30% area median income. So again, when we talk about who's on the public dole, you're looking at one of them. You see somebody who makes $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, and they take the mortgage interest deduction, they're on the public dole just like someone who's living in the quote-unquote projects. There's $100 billion that they're said in that mix if we do mortgage interest deduction reform. So imagine what we could pay for if folks like myself and others who are making a lot more than me all of a sudden didn't get that deduction or got less of it over certain income points. So there's a lot of money there that could be used for other things, which leads me to my last point. Public housing, the deferred maintenance there, it's believed that it would take about $30 billion to renovate and kind of fix up, if you would, public housing for about 1.2 million households. Again, I did appropriations work for Senator Barbara Mikulski, and I remember when conversations would happen where people would say, oh, that's really naive. We can't do that. That's too much money. And then the Washington Post will come out with an article about a year ago that talks about spending that is approved by people who work in this Congress for the military that wasn't even requested by the military brass. Billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. And then folks will say, we're going to war, but that will be done off budget, so we won't count it. Now, a minute ago, we didn't have the billions of dollars to pay for the basic maintenance for the housing for low-income Americans, but all of a sudden, we found billions of dollars for the military they didn't even ask for, and found billions of dollars for war that we're not even going to count on the ledger. So I think it'd be great to see a push to say, look, one time, let's just drop $30 billion into public housing and fix it up and make it decent for the Americans who live there.
Okay, I was going to try to be sneaky and get more than one in, but I guess I don't have to be that sneaky.
Lay out your list.
Okay, but I am actually going to assume that we're not going to be able to get rid of the TANF block grant, and that I'm talking about working in the realm of, okay, we've got this law, but we did lose 30% value over 20 years, so we do need to get some of that money restored, and we need to get this index for inflation, and we do need to get the new money and the existing money redirected and targeted to what welfare reform was supposed to be about. One of my colleagues, Donna Pavetti, often says, well, if originally they really couldn't have spent the money for all those other things, and it really was, as said, for work, childcare, and cash, we would have a very different looking program. We would have more funding for childcare. We would have richer employment programs, maybe guaranteed jobs, subsidized employment programs. So a lot of money has been pulled away from those things, and there are ways that are medium-sized, tinkering ways to redirect the new money, to distribute it differently, to limit how it can be spent, and to limit how the existing block grant money and the state what's called maintenance of effort money can be spent. And so basically I put this under when I thought I could only say one thing, I was calling this increase accountability. And increase accountability both on spending and on the funding, and increase accountability on access to benefits, access to cash, and access to work services. And hold states accountable for serving families. It's not okay to only serve 4 out of every 100 poor families. So there are measures that states could, you want this money, you're supposed to be helping families. You want this money and you want it to be about work? Okay, let's see you actually help these families. Let's see you serve them, let's get them back to work. And so I think all of those things can be called accountability, and there are very specific provisions and measures that can be put in the law to really change what it looks like.
So just to sum up a little before Debbie takes the questions from the audience. So last chance, if you've got questions you want to put in, either online or in the cards, take the advantage. I guess I'd just say is, what you really hear from this is that there are good ideas. There's not a silver bullet. There's not one proposal that's going to solve all the problems, but there really is a package. And looking both at sort of the employment side, the things that really have to happen through the labor market, because there's no benefit program that's going to solve the scheduling problem, for example, but also recognizing that, we're not, certainly in the short run, and we're going to need the benefits, and the need for them is not going to go away, and that the two can fit together to make a real difference in people's lives. If you use the poverty measure that reflects all these benefit programs, we cut pre-tax and transfer poverty about in half now. That's a huge accomplishment. But it also means that we still have almost as far to go as we've come now. So I hope that we'll be able to work together to do that. And with that, I will let Debbie ask some questions. Or on behalf of all of you.
Please join me in thanking the panel for conciseness and really important statements. I do have a bunch of questions, some of which I held from the last time because they seem to relate to folks that are here right now. There is one very insistent questioner who wanted to point to the real problem of evictions. And Luana's story included the experience of eviction. Matthew Desmond's book has highlighted that. David, I don't know if you want to respond as connecting some of the policy suggestions that you made to the rather rampant problem of evictions. How can we get more housing security for people?
So I think that comes in a couple angles. One, if people can afford the housing where they live, they won't get evicted, right? And that's a combination of the price point of the housing that's provided, the income that the person has, their ability to pay, and then also legal protections they may have as it relates. So an example that right here in Washington, D.C., residents, there's something called a Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. So residents have the right to either buy or partner with someone to help purchase their building when landlords are looking to essentially kind of opt out and oftentimes do condo conversions, turn a rental building into condos, and we saw a lot of that here. So sometimes you need kind of the legal requirements that give protections to residents to organize and to stay in their building. Then there's also obviously rental assistance emergency rental assistance programs that can come into play. Some that are funded at federal level. And then you also have, again, whether it's federal and local funding that just makes the housing affordable on the front end is important as well. Then obviously the wage pieces that have been referred to here before.
Thank you. Jim, there's one question about food banks. What do you think the role of food banks should be in the overall anti-hunger effort?
So food banks are wonderful, and we work closely with food banks and the Association of Food Banks. But food banks will be the first to tell you that they can't meet the need, and more food banks support improving, protecting, growing the federal nutrition programs. The federal nutrition programs provide about 25 times as much support money for food every year as do all the charitable food networks in America combined. That's Catholic Charities, Feeding America, and all the others. So that gives you a sense of that the way to do, another way to look at this is the growth in the nutrition programs over the last 10 years. Every year has added growth equal to all the emergency food in America. Year after year, it grows by another Feeding America plus Catholic Charities. So the only way we're going to address hunger is by dealing with the fundamental wages and work supports and income supports people get, plus through federal support, nutrition support programs that are adequate to meet the need.
Thank you. Here's one for Sarita. Caregiving jobs, and parenthetically, I will say that you are a co-chair of Caring Across Generations for children or seniors or people with disabilities. That's highly skilled work, but the pay is terrible. What can we do about that? So I didn't promise easy questions for you. That's a tough one.
No, it's a great question. And actually, I want to contextualize it about why we actually have to deal with this question now. Every 8 seconds, someone in America turns 65. 10,000 people a day, 4 million people per year. People are living much longer lives, which is tremendously wonderful. And it also means that the need for basic supports, caregiving supports, are going to just double over the next, decade. And we don't actually have the workforce to meet that need. And there's a lot of people who provide that support in their families as family care providers, but that there's not enough. In addition to that, next year marks the year that millennials turn 35 and are beginning to have kids. So you have two of the largest populations in our country who are going to need serious care support. And we don't have a plan in place of how we're going to meet that need. So there's a lot that's being done now and can continue to be done to actually improve, both create more care jobs, actually improve the quality of those jobs, to make sure basic labor standards are met. Because, for example, many home care workers, for the first time last year, earlier this year, just got basic minimum wage and overtime protections. They've been excluded from every basic labor protection, right? And thirdly, we have to create more opportunities for training and career ladders in the care sector. So not only in the formal hospital settings, but in home care settings, because more people prefer to age in home and in place. So there's a lot that can be done in addition to increasing access to affordability and choices, affordable choices for every American family to be able to have the kind of care options that they need. I do want to say this is a really critical issue. The care workforce right now, home care workers make on average $9 an hour. These are people who care for our loved ones. They can't support themselves. And meanwhile, I have met countless home care workers who will say to me, I love the work that I do, but I can't stay in it. I can't sustain myself. And if you don't live in a state where their Medicaid expansion is happening, you don't have access to health care. Many of them face, the issue of affordable housing. We are actually seeing a workforce that is being forced into poverty, and it's not right. It's not the values of our country. And we have a moment now to actually improve those jobs. So Caring Across Generations is a campaign that we're working on that is actually working to actually shift that and really help us do the kind of long-term planning that we need and come up with real solutions for communities across the country and at the federal level.
Great, thank you. Here's a question that's very important, and I'm not exactly sure who to ask it of, so I will throw it generally out. It has to do with rural poverty initiatives. What kind of special programs would be helpful for people who are poor in rural areas, since I don't know that this is entirely true, but certainly a lot of programs are mostly focused on metropolitan areas. So I don't know, anybody can give me the high sign that you might want to take this? Jim is one.
I'll take
And then
a
Liz,
small
okay.
part of it. Unbeknownst to the media and the public and many rural members of Congress, of course, poverty and food insecurity are as high or higher in rural areas as they are in metropolitan areas. The Obama administration has turned a lot of the rural poverty agenda over to USDA. USDA has a rural poverty strike task force that's focused on job development, housing development, and other things. But one crucial thing is making members aware of how much poverty and how much reliance on the programs we're talking about exists in the areas that they're in, because suburban and rural members often are not paying attention to the extent to which their constituents rely heavily on these programs and are in desperate need. That's my quarter of the answer.
Liz, did you want to give a?
Well, I think he took about half of mine. To the extent that we're talking about asset limits and what kind of vehicle you can own, and that has loosened quite a bit, but it could get, there's noises actually about tightening it again in terms of ability to have a car. I mean, you could talk all you want about public transportation, but when you're talking about rural America, people really do need to have a car, and they need to have a car that does not mean that they can't get food. They can't get help with food. And in terms of, I agree also in terms of job development, subsidized Subsidized jobs is the way to go, but those are generally something that you would not want to do on an ongoing basis. So you sort of need to have that as part of a plan of what is it going to connect to next. And that's one of the big questions, and that's where you're looking at economic development, or development of sufficient skills that it is something that you could be doing remotely. That's not an easy response for a lot of the rural population, but it is something, it is potentially an area to look. It's a challenge. I sometimes drive through some very, very rural towns in Washington State where I live and think, what does a time limit on cash assistance mean in a place like this? There is literally 2 gas stations.
Right. And I do know that many TANF programs will have requirements of that you have made countless job-seeking efforts in rural areas where there just aren't that many employers. It's really just, unfortunately, a cruel joke for people.
Yeah, in fact, a friend of mine who worked for South Carolina State Agency said that some of those make 30 job contacts. The 2 employers in the county were calling up and saying, will you stop sending all these people to us repeatedly every week? Because there's only 2 places to apply and everybody has to make 30 job contacts.
Wow. Well, we said that this session would give you some acquaintance with the real world, and that is another nod in the direction of the real world. Here's one about housing for David. Another one. Can you talk about the National Housing Trust Fund and how that offers some new opportunities to increase the supply of affordable housing?
Sure. So I'm proud to be on the board member of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, and they've really been a champion and working in the field on this with other organizations as well to get the trust fund funded. So bottom line is it'll provide more new money. There's not, it's been a fight. We in the industry have been losing money, certainly at the federal level. It's kind of a fight to get new money. So monies that can be used in a flexible way, either on the capital side or on the rent subsidy side, anything that can be brought into the system to help support housing. There's still a fight going on about making sure that the funds that are supposed to come to the trust fund stay there, and it's a whole nother conversation about the nuance around Fannie and Freddie and Mr. Watt and all of that. But bottom line is we're a lot closer than we were. We think so, an initial flow of money will come, but there's still a fight to make sure that money comes. But I think the key point is that there will be new money. I was in a conversation this morning in Baltimore with the philanthropic community, along with some local government officials, and I asked the government officials, what is it that you could use from the philanthropic community in terms of new money or different uses of existing money that would help you do more of what you want to do? It's the same question in housing. It's an issue of we need new money, and we can't pretend we don't. I get sick of being in conversations where people want to tell folks in the affordable housing world where you're dealing with low-income folks, you should build more efficiently. You should squeeze out all of the costs, be more efficient so that you don't have to require as much money. At the end of the day, building a housing unit is what it is in terms of cost. Now, it can get more expensive if you put bells and whistles and fancy granite top, but at the end of the day, kind of the bricks and sticks are the bricks and sticks. Now, if by definition the person that you are trying to serve, the household you're trying to serve, only makes X and the expense is Y, there's a gap there. And that gap's got to be filled by something from someone. And so whether it's the federal government, state government, local government, philanthropy, angel investors, wherever it is, we can't pretend that we don't need more money. So the exciting thing about the National Housing Trust Fund is it brings new money into the system.
Which we don't hear that frequently, so this is a major piece of good news. Thanks, David. Here is a question about immigrant families. Another tough one that various of our panelists and other speakers may take a little piece of. The 2 issues that are raised in the question, unauthorized immigrants. Are there anti-poverty strategies or programs that can be of assistance to them? And the other part of the question is about mixed status families, that is, families where some, the children may have been born here, so they are here quite legally, and perhaps their parents aren't. How are they being represented is what's asked, but I guess what kind of services or benefits would help them. So, Olivia, were you nodding because you were just being sympathetic, or did you want to take a piece of this?
I would be glad to say something, but several people on the panel might start, and then if
Okay.
left out, I'd be happy to add. It's really important.
One.
Sure.
Okay,
Well,
Jim.
The good news is that there's no legal status requirement for all the child nutrition programs, school lunch, school breakfast, WIC, child care food, after-school food, summer food. In TANF, in SNAP, there is a legal status requirement. The 96 welfare law originally created long waiting periods for all documented immigrants, but for kids that was eliminated. So documented kids are eligible right away. Adults typically after 5 years, seniors and some seniors less. Just one other point, in all these programs, but SNAP in particular, of course, language barriers and fear of immigration consequences, even though there are no immigration consequences, keep people from applying for themselves if they're eligible, keep people from applying not just for their legal status kids, but for their U.S. citizen kids. And so there are stigma and fear and language barriers in addition to the legal barriers that may or may not exist depending on the program. And of course, confusion, given the fact that nobody knows all those rules.
Right. Did somebody else want to,
Olivia.
if you want to, sure. Just come to the mic so that everybody around the country can hear you.
Oh, I can do it. Okay. So is there anybody here from, I notice NCLR is a sponsor, anybody here from NILC or any of the immigration organizations? Well, so I wanted to just add two things. The first is that the focus on immigrant families, and in particular mixed status families, is very important when you're thinking about the well-being of American families and our future. It's not a small number of kids. When you think about citizen children growing up with a member of their family who's not documented, you're talking probably 4 or 5 million children. So that's, again, just what we were talking about with LaWanda. If you're not helping those children grow up successful, well-educated, and able to succeed in the future, you're really damaging our future as a nation. Second thing, I just want to underline Jim's point, which is those citizen children are eligible for everything, but a big challenge is that the way federal laws are administered by the states or the ways families just hear about it can stand in the way of those children's receiving help. So it's really important to focus on that. The third thing, CLASP is very proud of being one of the organizations working with probably many others on this list, but with an amicus brief to the U.S. Supreme Court on the court case to be decided in the coming days about whether the president had the authority to give parents of citizen children work authorization. And from our perspective, again, talk about evidence-based, there's nothing clearer in the child development research than the idea that stabilizing parents' lives is really good for children. Should that presidential executive order be upheld, then there will be another thing to say about how undocumented adults who are parents of citizen children can improve their lives. Namely, they'll have access to some work training and education options, as well as security in their work that they don't necessarily have now. So I just want to highlight, it really matters. It's a really important topic going forward, and particularly if you think about the whole family, there are a lot of really important opportunities that need to be seized.
Okay.
And if you want a more precise view of the numbers Olivia was alluding to, you can buy her husband's book by Bill Fry from Brookings.
Well, that's a good. We'll put that link on our website too. We are coming to the close of our program. I want, please, I hope everyone will join me in thanking all of the presenters here and the ones who spoke before, as well, of course, as Leader Pelosi. Oh, come on, let's clap a little bit. That remember, we have handouts from all these organizations and more. Thanks very much to our co-sponsors who are listed there and at home. This whole event has been recorded. We'll have the link to on our website, so please share it around. Most important, please let this be the start, or for many of us, a continuation of our work together. Sign up to get our emails so you can know about key actions you can take, and there are many coming up today and in all the days coming. We are glad that there is bipartisan interest in reducing poverty. Now, we have to insist that the federal government strengthens the programs that work, and with your help, that's what we'll do. Thank you very much.